I was muted. Apologies. Rich, am I on now?
Nope, we just started recording, so I'm going to do the preamble and then I'll hand it off. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday, April 11th edition of the Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting. I'm going to do the same speech I do every single time, so I apologize if you're binge listening to this on SoundCloud because you've heard it 28 times now. We're super excited to have the sheer volume of intellect in these calls, and we want to make sure that we leverage them as much as possible. So if anybody here has a question, a comment, or observation they want to make, please do not be shy. Type your question in the chat, and somebody, if you don't have a microphone, somebody will come along and hopefully identify that and read it out to the rest of the group. Or if you do have a microphone, feel free to interrupt, because we do it to each other all the time. There's no reason why everyone else can't get in on that as well. We're going to talk about a few different topics today. One of them is we're going to have an introduction by Stephen for the general thought of the week. I'm going to talk a bit about how the poll went and some options for what polling looks like in the future, and then we'll get into the as quickly as we possibly can, because that's where the meat of the conversation is. And once we hear from Risk, we'll have a Q&A session and see if we can get to the bottom of this whole crypto money thing that we're also interested in. With that, Stephen, I'm going to hand this off to you and let you show the road.
Thank you. Firstly, hello everyone, and really thank you very much for participating. I think the turnouts that we've had over the past month to 2 months has been fantastic, and really helps us to consider all the challenges that is posed by the MakerDAO system. But again, I'd like to reiterate, like Rich has, there are basically 3 themes that we want to cover in these calls. The one is the demand and supply dislocation. The other is collateral types, the collateral portfolio, parameters and their adjustments. And the third is exogenous risks to the system. But today specifically, I'd like to thank the community members that have formed a working group. And this working group is focused on sourcing data and presenting metrics that help us get a better sense of the MakerDAO system. So to those guys that have actually stepped forward, thank you very much. In fact, we're going to hear from one of them today. And what I urge folks to do is listen carefully, and from that sort of take a leap out of the page and see where you could possibly contribute as well. So again, the theme that is still on our minds is the demand and supply imbalance. Obviously, with one eye on the speculation of ETH and the other one on the stability of DAI. Now, we have a whole bunch of very interesting questions to answer. I mean, one such question is, why create DAI from a CDP when the price of DAI is below $1? Something to mull over, something we can chew on in this particular meeting. But also keep in mind, while we figure out the answer to these questions, we've got to remember that this is a decentralized governance, rather decentralized scientific governance. And we have to be thoughtful of the fact that we are facilitating ideas that are ultimately up to MKR governance to decide on. And considering that this is a continuous process, I will keep asking, please keep as involved as possible. So that's my little preamble as well. Thanks, Rich. Over to you.
Sorry, you caught me off guard. I was taking notes.
No
and actually trying to prepare for what you're just about to hand over. So here we go. I want to talk about 2 different things today. I'm going to make it as brief as I possibly can. I want to, let me back up 1 second. So as a community, we are literally iterating on what governance looks like, and that changes week to week. I'm encouraged by those changes because week to week, the process improves. And here's sort of a picture of how the process has improved since last time. I want to reiterate some of the conclusions or some of the support that was expressed in the subreddit about this new process, and solicit some questions from the people here or comments. So the idea is this, and I'm going to borrow liberally from a small manifesto I published in a comment thread last week. But after our last call, it occurred to me that we might have been falling into a bit of a rhetorical or a cognitive dissonance problem, where in the last few calls that we've had, it's become binary. the framing of our discussions, where we'd eventually sort of narrow in on a discussion about whether the community is feeling hawkish or dovish or aggressive or conservative, and based on this trying to identify the sentiment, this ad hoc sentiment analysis, coming up with a number that appropriately represents that sentiment. And that was a complex process. And so after the call, we had this long debate in the Rocket chat, and it led me to making this proposal in the MakerGov subreddit that proposed, instead of us trying to determine as a group what signals we are identifying and what signals we need to acquire from a wide range of potentially unidentifiable people, what we can do instead is move into a process of continuous polling, as opposed to determining whether a poll is required. And this continuous polling process is fairly standardized, and that makes the mechanics on our side a lot easier, and it makes predictability for the outside world a lot more understandable as well. And the idea is that every Monday we will enter a new governance poll into the system, and that governance poll will contain a default range of options, stability fee options to choose from. Right now, that seems to be 100 bips from 0 to 4, sorry, as an increase for the following week. And then we allow the community to determine which of those options they find most palatable. When we come into this governance call, we review the results, talk about any other issues that might have cropped up during the course of the week, or review numbers. And then that leads to an executive on the following Friday. And this weekly cadence is, at that point, it becomes sort of this loose framework for forward guidance as well. It's a great way for the community to figure out which way the wind is blowing, the external crypto community to understand which way the wind is blowing inside of MakerDAO, inside of the community, I mean. And it lowers the friction, the technological and bureaucratic friction involved with a bunch of people in the organization sort of scrambling to come up with, like I said, sentiment analysis, collecting signals, and trying to be as agnostic as possible in these processes. But we're humans, and that's not possible, no matter how tricky or how much effort we put into it. So the idea now is that every week, poll comes out, the same options, community signals, and then community chats, and then the community votes, and then we just do that until what I'm assuming is some point in the happy future, very soon, where we all determine that this is slightly onerous and no longer required, and then maybe we stop the cadence until there's a peg deviation that needs to be addressed, or that. Obviously, and this is a trap that we can't fall into. The world, or the crypto world, is not going to look the way it does right now in perpetuity. So it's entirely possible that in a month or two, we need to start presenting negative options on a weekly basis for a stability fee decrease. And that's the plan that we're looking at right now. That was a bit of a speechifying. So I want to stop here, and there's my buddy Aviv with a question. So if somebody has any comments, questions, tweaks, improvements to the process, I would dearly love to hear about them. Aviv, did you want to ask whatever you just typed?
Yeah, sure. I'm just curious if there's anyone who thinks that that spread might not be ideal, just because we have to ask this question: where is the equilibrium stability fee? If the equilibrium stability fee is somewhere high, like 25 or 30%. You know, we heard some people talk about that they think that it could be quite a bit up there. I personally don't intuitively feel that way, but if it is at 30% and we're limiting ourselves at a 4% increase, it means that it'll take us about a month to get there. So,
yeah, and that's a great question, and one that I do not have an answer to. I guess I wish I could say that we have science that shows that this percentage of people are calm and considered and evaluating the data when it comes to stability, because the increases in this percentage, potentially just more reactionary. I think there might be a risk there that the market takes a quick downturn and then people start pressing the 30% increase button. But I'm not sure. I think that it would take some of the analysts in this call and some of the risk managers in the call and maybe some of the fund managers to present a range over time, or a rate, I guess, a rate of rate increases that would make sense for the community. And then present that back to us would be the ideal situation. Did that halfway answer your question, Avi?
Yeah, no, I agree.
The fact that I don't know, does that answer your question? All right, so I want to get some, or at least I want to give the opportunity for people to comment on this idea of a weekly standard cadence and whether they feel that this might be too onerous, not flexible enough, whether it doesn't identify issues, or whether it's just completely peachy keen and this is what we should be doing now.
I have a couple comments on the governance. Sure. So I think we've been very fortunate in the past that we've had kind of a convergence in ideas between this governance call, Reddit social media, and the official governance poll, at least in the past. I think this last week was maybe the first time where we saw a bit of a divergence where seems like the call we had last week and the governance poll were in line, but Reddit seemed to go the opposite way. There, kind of the general sentiment there was, if we had listened just to Reddit, then we'd be talking about something completely different. And first off, I think decentralized governance is hard, and this is obviously a big topic of contention in the wider crypto community. Bitcoin governance versus Ethereum governance, and now we have our own flair of MakerDAO governance as well. And there's been, a couple comments on, is our style of governance too centralized? If we have few large MKR holders kind of swinging the governance poll or the executive vote one way, what happens? Is that good or is that bad? I just want to kind of bring up, so it's on people's minds, that we might run into a situation where we could have a really great call on on the weekly call and have really great Reddit conversations, and then the governance poll is complete opposite, or the executive vote is complete opposite. So just something to mull over for everyone as they think about governance. My personal opinion is that MKR holders are the only one with skin in the game. They have capital at stake, so that definitely, me personally, I'm not worried. I've kind of been around the crypto circuit a little bit, but I know that this could be an issue when things start to diverge hard, and we saw a small glimpse of it this week.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that there's a couple different sort of meta issues going on. One of those is governance is hard. And it's always been hard, and it will always be hard. There's no magical algorithm coming to save us, crypto or blockchains or not. We also are going to see this push and pull of stakeholders. Humans have a tendency to pick camps, and so we're going to see camps form. I think that a lot of these things are risks that we should all be prepared to understand. I think that this is kind of a meme that I've been trying to repeat in conversations as much as I possibly can. But from my perspective, governance isn't a problem to be solved. It's a problem to be handled as elegantly and as sophisticated or as fairly as possible. But it's not something that goes away. I've been in co-ops for many years. And this is precisely the way governance looks. But it's good that you raised those issues, particularly because this is another kind of meta consideration that we need to take into account, is that as humans, excuse me, we're not really good at separating signals, but we are very good at identifying patterns. And I've seen the same thing. Well, this should come as no surprise that I've seen the same thing, because I've been in a tear in the subreddits for the last 2 days. But I've got the same impression. It's interesting that we see this same volume of people that are like, you guys are burning MakerDAO to the ground because of blah, blah, blah. And as I dug into this, it occurred to me, I did some counting. And there's only 5 or 6 people that are sort of repeating that same message out of potentially hundreds of commenters. And so it's easy to come away from one medium with a distinct impression that this is the general consensus, and then hitting another medium and finding a completely different general consensus, which is
and it also emphasizes kind of this notion of scientific governance that we've been trying to instill in the community, and not emotional governance. There was quite a few people that were, all of a sudden very concerned for MakerDAO's reputation and its growth and its adoption. And I think it's important to realize that, the primary driver of our growth and adoption is a stable peg.
Yeah, and that's actually the message that there's been some really great responses in the subreddits as well. Very considered, very well thought out and backed up with data and all the rest of it. But that align with my own personal thinking on this matter. But I'm heartened by the fact that there seems to be, from my perspective, and I just caution against people saying that they found a general consensus or an understanding, but this is the one that I personally have chosen for my own biases. But the large maker holders that I've seen or spoken to seem to have this very clear understanding that the success of this system it hinges specifically on the stability of DAI. There is no short-term gains to be made here. There's no secret game theoretical conspiracies afoot. The only thing that matters is that long-term stability of the DAI is better for every single actor in this ecosystem. And I'm hoping that that's a message that keeps on getting put out there. I feel like I've kind of gone off script here a bit, so I want to make sure that we don't lose the conversation about the polling system. Has there been any questions in the chat there about the polling system, or do we have like another thread happening here? Looks like a new thread. So with that, I was hoping to come up with some pie charts for everybody to show how the governance system usage of the governance system has increased over time. My Python script broke last night, and so I do not have those. So I'm just going to talk about numbers. Obviously, anybody who's had a look at the voting portal can see that there's overwhelming support for a 4% increase. It's not even worth actually coming up with numbers. I call it 90. I'll post something in the subreddit later on today that actually has the breakdown. But we've seen not only an overwhelming support for a 4% increase, but we've also through stake weight, but we've also seen an overwhelming majority of the voters that came out selecting that as well. And another great range of whales, and I can't remember what all the classifications are, all the way down to krills voting for 4%, which is great. And I want to continue to see that, because this is something that we talked about in a few calls ago, but signaling here is paramount. And I've done it myself, and I did it myself this time. I am a krill. And so even if you're not going to move the needle, getting out there and signaling that your support for any one of these options is an amazingly important data point. We need to know whether 90% of the stake weight is on one option, but 90% of the individual voters on another option. That signals that there's something that we need to address. So even if you're not going to move the needle, please vote. Anyway, so that's another little speechifying. We saw 64 voters in total signal for the 4% increase. Represented vast majority of the stake weight, as I've already stated. That's 50,000 maker placed into that polling option. I think that this is potentially one of the records for voter turnout. So that comes back to my week over week incremental improvements are good enough for me speech. So obviously apathy is being combated here, and we're seeing more people engaging with the system. What happens now is that we get to talk about, we could talk about the way that the vote shook out and what the implications are in the Q&A session. But ultimately what happens next is tomorrow at 9 a.m. PST and 4 p.m. UTC, an executive poll will go out. the options in that. Well, it's it's continuous approval voting. So it's you signal your support for the existing picture of the system, or voters will signal their support for the new picture of the system, which will include a 4% increase for a total of 11.5% stability fee. There was a rash of questions in the sidebar. David, are you keeping track of this? Is there anything that needs to be asked?
I'm loosely keeping track of it, but there's nothing in particular. Well, what if two options have almost equal numbers of votes in the governance poll? But I think that the answer to that is basically just a repeat in the poll.
In the polling system? So yeah, this is something that we were discussing when we were considering this continuous polling option and having like a wide range of options. Are we going to dilute the signal? And NK Pine, our sage and wizard, who whenever he speaks, it's worth listening to, has pointed out that there's some interesting behaviors that we can start looking for in that model, and because people can change their votes or restake their signals whenever they want. The assumption is at that state, people will begin to capitulate, and if there's a wide distribution, then over time people will begin to aggregate into their next best options. How well that works, not entirely sure. We haven't seen it in action yet, but nobody's locked into a vote after they vote. They're welcome to change it.
Another good question from the chat was from Michael Dunsworth about what the goals are, short-term, mid-term, long-term, that we have in place to evaluate the execution success and failure, and whether we formally define those, I guess. Yeah.
It must be hard, Mike. It must be hard for you because you can't do emojis in these chats. It must be a struggle. Do you want to ask that question or give us some clarity on that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I can't do emojis, which is a bummer. But yeah, no, guys, I think, I mean, a lot of people are getting really hung up on, voter turnout and stuff. To be honest, at the scale that MakerDAO is at, it is the biggest indicator of success when nobody turns out to vote, because you're only going to vote when there's misalignment, and alignment is everything. So right now, the reason why I go back to goals is because no matter how long I want to argue with the person sitting next to me, I can do that all day. But if there's no North Star that we know of, whether that's, look, the big goal is stability and all that stuff, but you might say the execution strategy for the next 3 to 6 months is to let the peg slip and remanage expectations that it is a soft peg within 3 to 5%. And the goal is to reach 1-to-1 over the next 3 or 5 years when there's 1 billion people in the space instead of right now. And I just think there's a lot of there's not really much clarity around what the goals are, short, medium, and long term, because that's going to affect the total execution. Unless the goal is right now only to have a 1-to-1 peg, but it's going to break in 2 years, or it's not scalable. That's a lot different. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's just there's a lot of.
I'm catching up to you. So it's going to be super hard for a lot of reasons. So a lot of people need to agree on a forward-facing statement like that, which would be an adventure. What's the utility of it? This is the part. So are you saying that it creates an expectation or would raise some consumer confidence that 2% either way is a fact of life, or 1% is the goal?
I think he's saying, are we in this early stage trying to prioritize for DAI growth, CDP growth, user growth, diversity of adoption? What is like the overall MKR business strategy, if I'm interpreting it correctly?
Yeah, well, I mean,
sure.
How do you guys look at the pieces that go into everything? Because you could make it stable for you can make it $1 for the next week, and if the goal is to have it be $1 to $1, or stable in 5 years' time, the building blocks that make that happen are much, much different than a lot of the things that we're sort of trying to throw at it, basically. So yeah, sorry.
Sure, I can speak to that specifically, and I'm glad that you brought it up, because this is sort of a recurring meme as well. The short answer, and it's going to sound glib, is we're doing all of that, and here's the explanation. There's because people are so, especially in this venue, are so engaged, hyper engaged with risk parameters, the PEG, voting. It's easy to get into this mode of thinking that MakerDAO is obsessed with the stability fee, and their PEG is 90% of the activity that happens in MakerDAO. And I can assure you that that is not the case. MakerDAO is large and complex, and there's a lot of people working their little fingies to the bone to achieve all of those goals that have been just listed out there. So we have fantastically successful business development department that's going out and building business relationships and partnerships. And I'm hard pressed to find anybody in the industry that has more real, tangible partnerships and initiatives than MakerDAO does. So much so that we've had to sort of scale back on the amount of announcements that we make because it's just too much. It's exhausting. So we have departments of people that are increasing demand on the demand side with real use cases. We have the grants program, which is generating grassroots onboarding, education, and tooling in the global space. We have a series of, well, I don't know whether I should be listing off every department in MakerDAO. So very aggressive marketing and PR departments. We're generating content. So it's easy in this venue to think that, like, hey, MakerDAO is playing with one lever and they should be trying to convince people to use DAI. And it's important to remember that that's exactly what we're doing. There's no binary critical path here. There's developers furiously working on multi-collateral, business developers furiously working on new partnerships. The list goes on and on and on.
Totally. I just think, maybe any kind of clarity around goals and stuff like that is super helpful. I know you guys are executing like crazy, and all of this stuff is a function of, like, it's a result of actually teams graduate to this problem. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that I feel the goals in place, which everyone can either, basically people need to get behind. And yeah, that's all my suggestion with any kind of clarity on that. But thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No, I love that. And I'll make sure that's called out specifically in the summary post and the discussion thread, because this is, I think you've identified something that needs to be discussed over a series of calls and hashed out. So yeah, let's do that. Let's figure out what the short, midterm, and long-term goals are, at least from the community's perspective, and see how we can get that to inform the foundation as well.
Yeah. Also, there was a good question in the chat, and I've seen it asked in Reddit a couple of times too. And it's about the frictions about learning that a vote is happening or getting set up to vote. So I think it's a question basically about notification for MKR holders.
Yeah, that's another great question. So it's 2 or 3 pronged approach at this stage. The voting portal is a tool that's being rapidly iterated. It doesn't look the way it did when it launched. It's new and improved, and there's an even newer and improved version coming in the next month or so, which will increase the notifications across our properties so people know when they visit a MakerDAO site that there's a vote happening or risk parameter has changed. We'll be adding potentially some features. I'm not going to make promises for the UX people, but some tweaks that allow a more efficient selection of ranges, particularly on these polling, so we don't have to click through 8 different pages. There'll be some additional audit trails so people can look through the history of the votes, particularly with the executives, because the UI just isn't designed for that right now. So there's a significant number of improvements that are coming for the voting portal itself. The second question, though, is one that I'm fascinated with, and generally I've been tossing it back to the community to give us some suggestions, because it's kind of a hard problem to solve, is how do we know how to do polling data so people can just come to the site and see what's going on, or they can come to any one of our socials and figure out hopefully what's going on. But how do we push notifications to people? And that's a significantly harder question to answer, because we don't know who holds Maker. We don't have their email addresses or their Telegram handles. So it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but I would love for people to suggest the ultimate solution to us. I don't know what we can do to solve this problem other than just getting everybody to sign up for something. There's
Mike just mentioned
doing that in the past.
Mike just mentioned in the chat that him and his group are working on a notification standard.
All right, well, Michael Dunsworth will save us. There's your answer. That's been my secret belief for years now, so happy to see that that's the case. I just realized that I've monopolized the meeting, and I was hoping to talk for 5 minutes, and it's already 9:30, so it's desperately important that we hand this off to Risk at this point. So, Cyrus, can you provide us with some pretty graphs and numbers?
Yeah. Yep. All right. I'm sure, as you all know, the DAI peg has continued to be weak this past week. Pretty much as weak as it's been, hovering a lot around 96 cents. After last week's brief surge up into the 97, 98 handle, saw that drop off pretty quickly. DAI supply started to trend back up. As the ETH price kind of continued to go upwards, we had that one day where we had a lot of wipes and we saw supply starting to shrink, but that was, very quickly reversed. Just saw a lot of borrowing, a lot of weakness in the DAI price. This is pretty much it for this. I'm going to actually pass it off to Vishesh, who is also going to present a series of data. And then after that, we can kind of jump into all of this and talk about everything. So let me... Vishesh, are you ready to?
Yeah, I'll take over the screen. Okay, so yeah, all in all, a fairly interesting week actually. So I'll just kind of run down the basic State of the Union update and then dive in on a couple of interesting things. So as Cyrus mentioned, the DAI price has kind of suffered. One of my concerns is the peaks and the valleys both have kind of been trending down over the past few months, which seems like a more long-term trend, which I know we've been talking about. A lot of the problems with DAI is like a shorter-term problem, but this is interesting considering the next graph, which is this kind of consistent trend has happened both in times of decreasing and increasing ETH price. So that's just something for us to unpack at some point.
Vishesh, for people with bad connections, can you describe what graph you're looking at? That's the ETH volume price. Okay. So
yes. Sorry. I'll go a little slower in case connections need a second. So yeah, the first graph here is the DAI ETH trading volume and the VWAP price. So there's been pretty significant volume in the past week or so, and it's actually sustained higher, even though the price has been falling significantly. So that's potentially something to be concerned about. Then the next graph was ETH price and the DAI price. So what's interesting here, sorry, I can't see chat comments if people are commenting, so just let me know if there's questions. So here is the ETH price and the DAI price. I mean, as has been mentioned before on these calls, there is a fairly consistent kind of negative correlation between these two things. As the ETH price runs up, I think we tend to see either people take that as an opportunity to draw more and hold on to riskier loans, or as an opportunity to go ahead and leverage further on ETH, and then in the process sell DAI for potentially US dollars to purchase more ETH. So here, which is one of the interesting things, I'll double click on the DAI that's been minted and burned and the supply. So March 22nd was the last stability fee increase. So what was interesting is that obviously there's a little bit of rundown leading up to that increase, probably people burning in anticipation of experiencing a higher rate, which is something that I think we tend to see people do around stability fee increases. But then basically in the week after that, this started to recover and run back up. So supply increased, and the increased stability fee was not a significant enough deterrent to prevent people from drawing more DAI. So there was this one day where there was a bit of an uncharacteristic peak in wipes, and that was, I believe, due to like one large CDP. But then in the few days after that, it started to run back up again. And then it basically crossed back up above the supply level before the, or at the time of the increase. So clearly to me, that says that the 7.5% was not a significant enough deterrent. What is interesting as well is, yeah, and here you can see transaction volume overall. So I already zoomed in on this. So this is transaction volume. So transaction volume has actually been pretty significant as well in the past week or so. Vast majority of it has been non-burn and wipe transactions, so transfers. And I think there is something interesting that we can double click on at some point in terms of where these transactions are going. Again, my suspicion, given what's been happening with the price, is that there's been a fair amount of off-ramping to US dollars. But that's a little bit hard to show. So back over to one of the interesting data points for this week is and there's a conversation thread going on around DIPOR and kind of what do we learn from secondary lending platforms, interest rates, supply, borrow and supply volumes. So here what we've seen is a jump actually in the borrow and supply rates on Compound just this morning to basically the level of the current stability fee, or almost to that level. This was actually an extremely surprising data point in the sense that these kinds of jumps have not really happened before in the history of the compound interest rates, and certainly not before the stability fee increases. They tend to kind of line up or follow.
Is this an organic equilibrium being achieved, or is this the results of somebody just borrowing $1 million worth of DAI or something?
So I have
actually,
not.
Data points. There was one big CDP that mentioned in our Maker Rocket Chat that he had paid back $1 million DAI to the CDP portal and borrowed it from Compound. So actually, what Rich mentioned might be a really great point.
Okay, yeah, and it's good for us to adjust in terms of kind of whether this is one big CDP just driving a lot of activity or multiple different users. But we did see that kind of corresponding jump in borrow volume, which does explain the jump in rates. And not much to say in terms of burns and wipes and bites recently. But one thing to note was the collateralization ratio. So over time, we've kind of seen the collateralization ratio hold steady in the 300s and kind of run up a lot recently with the increasing DAI price, obviously. But what's interesting is that had actually started to level down a little bit in the last couple of days. So with the DAI supply going up and the collateralization ratio kind of coming down a little bit, we're seeing less, like, more tolerance for risk, I suppose I would say, which kind of makes sense with the increasing ETH price. I think people tend to get bolder with their CDPs, as mentioned, as the ETH price runs up, which is kind of what leads to some of the depressed DAI prices, I think.
Do we have any data that shows for newly minted DAI, if those are from new CDPs or from legacy CDPs? Do we know that?
I don't have that offhand. That's something that I could add.
I think it could ultimately demonstrate some really interesting color in terms of people's sensitivity. You were mentioning that, you know, as the price hasn't gone up, or when the stability fee was 7.5%, that wasn't enough to deter. Well, that you don't know necessarily if that's from new CDP holders or.
Sorry, by the way, someone in the Rocket chat says that 90% of the compound borrowing is him or her. Just pointing that out.
Yeah, I think that we're kind of, well, that kind of loops back into the question that Mateo just asked and Bishesh's presentation, is that this is probably a data point or a series of data points that we need to start adding to our graphs. And it loops into the chain analysis discussions that we're having with various different organizations that provide those numbers. But the age of the CDPs that are reacting to a stability fee increase is interesting. The volume of those wipes and or draws is interesting as well, and the number of people affected, because it'd be very, I think we've already seen it, but it'd be nice to have some hard data that shows that just like the rest of the crypto space, potentially it's like 2 or 3 large people moving the rest of us unintentionally or unwittingly. All right, thanks for that, Vishesh. That was great. Did anybody have any specific questions about the numbers that he presented there? All right, we have this really active conversation happening in the side chat as well, and
yeah, it's mainly about the debt ceiling.
Yeah, I know, and I don't want to jump into it just yet until we've determined. Cyrus, did you have anything else for us today?
No, I think we can just
Q&A session.
Yeah, I think we can just kind of jump into. I mean, the conclusion is basically too much DAI supply.
Yeah, in a nutshell. Right. So this we have 45 minutes left. I'm going to block off the last 5. So let's get into some questions.
Did you say we have 45 minutes left?
Sorry, yeah, I probably did, but that's not what I meant. We're at 45 minutes after the hour, so we have 15 minutes left. And the last 5 minutes is going to be for a recap. So let's try and get some questions in while we have a chance. We have, just to frame a discussion, we have essentially with single collateral DAI, we have a single lever that we're playing with right now, and that's the stability fee. With multi-collateral DAI, we'll have a range from collateral portfolio diversification to the DSR to a wide range of synthetic assets potentially eventually. But there's sort of this recurring question about whether, in fact, we do have an additional lever in single collateral DAI, and that lever potentially could be the debt ceiling. And we've gone back and forth on reasons why that might be a good idea or might be a bad idea. I am not a financial wizard, so I'm not going to make any predictions about that. But maybe Cyrus, you can, or Stephen, actually, with the risk framework knowledge embedded in your head, you might be able to provide some clarity as well. But maybe we can start off with just like a really brief discussion of what the debt ceiling is meant to do and why it's there, and then maybe we can break off into how it could potentially be reconfigured for other reasons.
So, I mean, the way I look at it, and feel free to disagree, is debt ceiling should primarily reflect the extent to which MakerDAO is willing to provide to generate DAI off of this collateral, and that should kind of be constrained by, you know, the liquidity of the underlying asset, just, you know, very qualitative type features and its trading profile, not necessarily used as a mechanism to adjust supply and demand. And the way I think about it is, you know, so let's say the debt ceiling were to just immediately be dropped down to like 50 million or whatever, and let's say that precluded the need for stability fee increases. And well, there's sort of 2 arguments for why people want to drop the debt ceiling. One is people want to do it in parallel to accelerate the DAI price, and the other is people want to do it in lieu of a stability fee increase because they're kind of not happy with the increases. So to do it instead of, I think, is not a great idea, and I want to be cognizant of time and don't really want to get into that right now. I think doing it in parallel could be something to consider and discuss. But at the same time, given what I said about my view on its function, you know, I'd be interested in hearing other people's opinions on, you know, couldn't we achieve the same effect by just more aggressively raising the stability fee?
Yeah, I'd love to hear that as well, because I keep on reminding people I'm a financial neophyte. But I think that we have an idea where we guess what would happen if we allowed the community to, or the ecosystem to hit a debt ceiling. But we don't know because we haven't tried it, and not knowing what will happen. This is the part that makes me nervous. So if we have some deep thinkers in the call that have given this some thought, I would love for them to get on the microphone and actually offer some suggestions or opinions about that. Matthew, do you have a mic? Matthew Light.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that when you're starting to play with a tool, DAI, which is its major value as being a stable coin, is because it's not an IOU coin, it is using market forces, supply and demand, to drive its value. When you start using artificial tools to cause it to sway up or sway down, the best example, like just a picture in your mind, is just imagine a ship that kind of runs aground. Yeah, I mean, its normal level where the water line would be is all of a sudden higher because you're using an artificial tool to cause it to be there. The question is not what would happen if you hit the ceiling. That part's kind of obvious. The question is what happens when you're no longer hitting the ceiling. Is you now have to rely on market forces to kind of recoup your artificial mechanism to cause it to go temporarily higher. How does the system handle that when you kind of let go of the ball and it drops? That's just extra risk to take.
I guess I would say my concern right now is we're at 95 cents. And my concern is that you could have a big dislocation. You could very easily go from 95 cents to 80 cents or even lower and spikes. And I think those dislocations would be damaging for the reputation of DAI. So I would say at 95 cents, we're in a pretty emergent situation regarding the long-term reputation. And so for me, I'm not so much worried about what's going to happen down the road. I mean, we know we've got a tool coming that's basically going to take care of demand. Right now, we don't have much organic demand for DAI, but when we can pay people 10% interest rate, if it needed to go that high, then we can get people to hold DAI in that case. But we don't have that now. All we have is raising rates and the debt ceiling. And I think both of them should be used. Presumably, we're going to have MCD in a few months, or at least within the next half year. And there we can use more appropriate tools. But until then, I would say we should consider using all the tools we have, not at 99 cents, not at 98 cents, but here at 95 cents. That's my view. So.
I think I'd like to chime in here. I think so there's always this organic demand for DAI, and that's some amount that we don't really know, and it's probably lower than we all really want it to be. So this organic demand for DAI is in DYDX or other platforms like Augur will have organic demand for DAI. Wherever DAI is locked up, I think DAI lockup is going to be a really good metric in the future to really just kind of provide a price floor for DAI. And we want this organic demand for DAI to be proportionally large compared to the total outstanding supply. So when it comes time to talk about the debt ceiling, I think we should consider what ratio of organic demand for DAI is the total outstanding supply for DAI. And when 9 out of 10 people are leveraging long ether to generate DAI, that's making DAI supply 9 DAI for every 10 is just leverage long DAI and not demand for DAI. So if we lower the debt ceiling, we are proportionally increasing the part of the DAI supply that was created by organic demand. That makes sense.
Well, that raises an interesting question. So you talked about determining how much of the DAI supply is just used for levering up, but what are the other ways that we can use to determine what organic demand actually is? I don't know.
Well, we could take all platforms like DYDX that has DAI locked inside of it, and we could calculate that that supply, and that would be some metric that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I suppose at least we would have a general sense of whether the primary use case is collateral or lockup in other DeFi apps. All right,
I have a general question about like using the debt ceiling as a policy tool, right? Imagine we lower the debt ceiling, and so wouldn't we have an indicator of when we're going to be sort of at the expiration of that move, just judging by the market maker inventories? Like, for instance, as the market maker DAI inventories shrink, that would signal to governance that we can now raise that ceiling, and then there would be some runtime there for that imbalance to happen again, really. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on that.
I mean, market maker inventories are not the only determinant of whether the DAI peg, the stability fee, needs to be adjusted one way or another.
So I do have a quick question regarding the market maker inventories. So let's say the price drops and market makers decide to dump inventory, or let's say we lower the ceiling and that eats into market maker inventory. What happens? Have we thought about this? Kind of what happens to the ecosystem for obtaining DAI when market makers are not really kind of arbitraging and there is a bit of a liquidity crunch on DAI? Do we have thoughts on what happens to the price of DAI or the supply?
I mean, my personal thoughts is that as market maker inventories shrink, you know, the price of DAI to its peg is kind of restored in that process. And then, you know what, I'm actually going to pause my thought here because I want to think it through before I say it.
So the reason I brought it up is because there may be some merit to considering the idea that having lower liquidity for DAI would actually drive up the price of DAI and increase kind of the value on the premium for CDP holders that are actually taking the trouble to draw it out and then provide that liquidity to the market. So maybe like it is possible that it's actually a potential problem that the market makers have had this inventory of DAI and have been eating up that spread kind of in the sense that maybe that's pain that the market should have been feeling to help keep the price of DAI at a more healthy and stable level. Because if those market makers have significant inventory and the price of DAI is depressed, that reduces the potential confidence. And I think it was Matthew that mentioned this in the chat. Hitting levels like 95 and consistently following those levels down is a legitimate concerning point, I think, for DAI, because we don't want people to lose confidence in the idea that, you know, DAI will someday return to the peg or close to the peg.
All right, that's an amazing question, and it's obviously something that needs to be explored. So I've just posted a link to the comment or the discussion thread for this call. Sometime in the next hour or two, I'll be reviewing the video and providing a summary in that thread. But if people have questions and they want to continue this discussion right now, feel free to jump into MakerGov, into that link that I posted, and make sure that your questions are answered and that we maintain some velocity here. We have 3 minutes left, though, unfortunately, and we need to wrap this up. Lots of people have hard stops. So, Stephen, did you want to leave us with a thought or a summary for us?
Well, yes, I did. Firstly, thank you, everybody. I was watching the number of participants in this call, and it was just skyrocketing. This is exactly what this call is for, to facilitate these kinds of minds to contribute towards, you know, creating what we need, but at the same time being cognizant of the fact that we need to keep the momentum going. We need to make sure that this very small 1 hour window is actually a part of a broader perspective in keeping this momentum going, keeping the voice going, keeping the governance going. So again, thank you very much for participating. And also keep in mind, I'm going to say it again and again, this is part and parcel of decentralized governance, where it is very important to realize it's the maker community and it's maker governance that ultimately has decision on what happens. So That's it from me. Thank you very much. This was really great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was excellent. So thanks everyone for your great questions. Summaries will be coming. Audio, video links, and transcripts will show up in MakerGov. And let's keep this thing cooking. Look forward to the executive vote for tomorrow at 9 a.m. PST, 4 p.m. UTC, and come help us shape the future of MakerDAO. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.